Crisp September dawn over the Blue Ridge foothills. My 43 rows of apple, pear, and cherry trees glowing gold. I'm fixing a busted irrigation line when gravel crunches. Police cruiser first, then a pearl-white Cadillac Escalade with HOA placard blazing. Out storms Georgette Whitmore, Sycamore Bluff HOA president, arms crossed, face sour. She jabs a finger at my orchard.
This eyesore breaks every rule! Shut it down today, or we'll bulldoze it! Officer, handle this!
The cop shifts awkwardly, mumbling about a complaint. I wipe dirt off my hands, sip coffee, and grin.
Georgette, before you bulldoze my family's land, check the deed on your HOA clubhouse, the one built on my property.
Her face goes ghost white. The cop's eyebrow shoots up. She sputters threats, clueless how screwed she is. What would you do if an entitled HOA Karen called cops to seize your legacy, only to learn you own hers? Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the full picture. My name is Reuben Calloway. I'm 51 years old, a retired land surveyor, and the third-generation owner of a 17-acre parcel in Harrow County, Virginia, about 40 miles west of Charlottesville. My grandfather, Chester Calloway, bought that land in 1958 for a number that sounds like a rounding error today. He put in fruit trees because he said a man who grows food is a man who can never be fully broken. Grandpa Chester passed in 2001. My father, Walt, kept the orchard going through drought years, through the 2008 crash, through bad harvests. When Walt died in 2019, he left me the property outright. No mortgage, no liens, clear title. I have the deed, the survey plat, and the county tax records framed in my kitchen like some people frame diplomas. I'd spent 28 years as a land surveyor. I know what I own. I know where every iron pin is on my property line. I know which creeks are navigable and which aren't. I know how to read a meets and bounds description the way a musician reads sheet music, fluently, with feeling. So when Sycamore Bluff Estates got developed on the land adjacent to mine about 9 years ago, I paid attention. I watched the bulldozers scrape away the red clay. I watched the McMansions go up. I watched the HOA signs appear, tasteful, hunter green with gold lettering, as if good taste could be declared by committee. The development's first HOA president was a retired insurance executive named Theodore Harkins. Teddy was reasonable. We shook hands. He understood that my orchard predated his HOA by roughly 60 years. We never had a problem. Then Teddy moved to Florida. And Georgette Whitmore ran for HOA president unopposed, because nobody wanted the job, and she, very much, did. Georgette is 63, a former regional manager for a big-box retail chain, and she treats the Sycamore Bluff HOA the way a general treats a small country, as something to be conquered and administered with maximum ceremony. She sends violation notices for weeds that are actually ornamental grasses. She has cited neighbors for flag sizes, for wind chime audibility, for the color of outdoor furniture cushions. She once fined a widower $400 because his mailbox post was leaning 2 degrees off vertical. 2 degrees. I knew all of this. But my orchard is not in her HOA. My land is my land. What could she possibly do to me? Turns out Georgette had been cataloging grievances against my orchard for 18 months before she made her first move. She had photographed my irrigation pump, industrial noise. She had documented the smell of the compost I use, agricultural odor pollution. She had even submitted a formal petition to the county planning office, arguing that my orchard constituted an incompatible land use under a zoning amendment from 1997. The petition was rejected. The county planning director, a methodical woman named Sandra Pruitt, sent Georgette a letter explaining that my land predated the 1997 zoning code, and that agricultural use was grandfathered in perpetuity under Virginia's Right to Farm Act. I only found out about that petition because Sandra called me personally to give me a heads up. But rejected petitions don't stop people like Georgette. They just redirect them. The first thing she did was call the Harrow County Sheriff's non-emergency line and report my irrigation pump as a suspected generator running illegally during a burn ban. There was no burn ban. It was February. The deputy who responded, a young guy named Officer Daniels, 26 years old and clearly embarrassed to be there, spent exactly 4 minutes confirming that the pump was legal, told me to have a good evening, and drove away. That was the opening shot. And I still didn't take it seriously enough. By March, Georgette had figured out that law enforcement wasn't going to be her weapon, so she pivoted to paperwork, the HOA equivalent of carpet bombing. She began filing code complaints with the county directly. Not one or two, a stack of them, all at once, all targeting the same property, mine. Noise ordinance violations, signage violations. I had a hand-painted farm stand sign on my fence, a complaint about the height of my deer fencing, a complaint alleging that runoff from my irrigation was causing erosion on or near HOA common areas. Each complaint required a county inspector to visit, document, and respond. Each one cost me a half day of my time. Every single complaint came back unsubstantiated. But Georgette had discovered something clever. In Harrow County, code complaint records are public, and if you file enough of them against someone, the sheer volume starts to look like a pattern, even when every single one is dismissed. She was building a paper record, not for the county, for a civil lawsuit. I found this out from my neighbor Wendell Oakes, a retired attorney who lived in Sycamore Bluff, but had zero love for Georgette. Wendell knocked on my door one April evening, smelling like bourbon and pipe tobacco, handed me a manila folder, and said, "She's been talking to a real estate attorney in Charlottesville, Reuben. She wants to pursue a private nuisance claim against your orchard." Private nuisance. That's a civil cause of action where a property owner, or in this case, a homeowners association, claims that a neighboring property's use is substantially and unreasonably interfering with the enjoyment of their property. The key word is unreasonably. Courts use a balancing test: the character of the neighborhood, the utility of the conduct being challenged, and whether the interference is something a normal person would find genuinely objectionable. Takeaway. In Virginia, a nuisance claim against an agricultural operation that predates the surrounding residential development faces an extremely steep uphill battle, because the Right to Farm Act, Virginia Code Section 3.2-300 et sec, creates a rebuttable presumption that the farm is not a nuisance if it has operated for more than a year before the complainant moved in. In other words, Georgette's neighbors chose to buy houses next to an orchard. The orchard was there first. Legally, that's almost always a dead end, and any competent attorney would have told her so. Either her attorney wasn't competent, or she wasn't listening. Maybe both. My countermove was quiet but deliberate. I called Sandra Pruitt at the county planning office and asked her to formally document, in writing, that my agricultural operation was grandfathered and compliant. Sandra was happy to do it. I had that letter in hand within 2 weeks, a 2-page document on county letterhead, with citations to the specific code sections, the date my grandfather's land use was established, and a clear statement that no future code complaints related to normal orchard operations would result in enforcement action. I laminated it. I put one copy in my safe, one with my attorney, and one in the filing cabinet in my barn, right next to the deed. Then I did something that annoyed Georgette considerably more than she expected. I called the local newspaper, the Harrow County Ledger, a twice-weekly paper with about 4,000 print subscribers and a surprisingly active Facebook page, and I gave them an interview about the history of my orchard. I talked about my grandfather. I brought out old photographs, Chester Calloway standing in front of his first apple trees in 1961, grinning like he'd found gold. The editor, a sharp woman named Patricia Holt, ran it as a Sunday feature under the headline, "Rooted in Harrow, the Calloway Orchard turns 65. 400 people shared it. Georgette's name wasn't in the article, but the timing was obvious to anyone in the community who'd been watching her crusade. Half a dozen Sycamore Bluff residents, people who lived under her HOA rules and didn't love it, called or emailed me to say they were rooting for me. Georgette's response was to escalate, because of course it was. She retained the Charlottesville attorney. He sent me a formal letter asserting that my orchard's commercial activities, specifically the farm stand I ran on weekends, constituted a nuisance under common law and violated a specific provision of the Sycamore Bluff HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CC&Rs. I read that last part 3 times. Violated their CC&Rs. My property isn't in their HOA. It has never been in their HOA. Not 1 square inch of my 17 acres is subject to Sycamore Bluff's CC&Rs. Legally, citing their CC&Rs against me was like citing the rules of a private golf club to a man who has never set foot on the course. But here's the thing about attorneys sending threatening letters. The goal isn't always to win in court. Sometimes the goal is to exhaust you financially and emotionally until you quit. I knew that. I'd watched it happen to other landowners over my surveying career. So I did two things. First, I called my own attorney, a real property specialist named Marcus Delgado out of Stanton, Virginia, who once described HOA overreach as America's most reliable source of billable hours. Marcus sent a 5-paragraph response letter that was politely devastating. It cited the Virginia Right to Farm Act, the lack of any HOA authority over my parcel, the county's written compliance confirmation, and closed with a note that any further unsubstantiated legal threats could give rise to a claim for tortious interference. Second, I started reading. Everything. Every piece of paper that had ever touched Sycamore Bluff Estates, the original developer's subdivision plat, the recorded CC&Rs, the HOA's articles of incorporation, the title abstracts on file at the Harrow County Clerk's office. I was a land surveyor for 28 years. Reading old land records is something I do the way other people do crossword puzzles. Automatically, compulsively, a little too fast for comfort. And about 3 hours into that reading, on a Wednesday night in late May, with the window open and the smell of rain coming in off the mountains, I found something. I didn't act on what I found. Not yet. I needed to be absolutely certain. The kind of certain you only get after 3 independent sources agree. So while I was quietly verifying, Georgette kept pushing. She convinced the Sycamore Bluff HOA board to pass a formal resolution declaring my farm stand an incompatible commercial operation within the visual corridor of the community. They sent that resolution to the county with a request for a hearing before the Board of Zoning Appeals. The Board of Zoning Appeals hearing was held on a Thursday evening in June at the County Government Center, a 1970s brick building that smells permanently of stale coffee and carpet cleaner. I was there. Wendell Oakes was there. Patricia Holt from the Ledger was there, notebook open. About 30 Sycamore Bluff residents were there, and my read on the room was that roughly half of them supported Georgette, and half were just curious to see what would happen. Georgette presented first. She had a PowerPoint. It had charts. It had photographs. It had a section titled Quality of Life Impact Assessment that she had apparently commissioned from a consulting firm in Richmond. The consulting firm's conclusion was that an orchard with a weekend farm stand within visual proximity of a residential subdivision reduced property values by up to 4%. The chair of the Board of Zoning Appeals, a retired engineer named Floyd Mathers, who had the patience of a man who has seen everything at least twice, waited until Georgette finished, then asked a single question. Ms. Whitmore, can you identify the specific zoning code section that the applicant's operation allegedly violates? Georgette cited the 1997 amendment. Floyd said, that amendment applies prospectively to new agricultural operations. The Callaway Orchard was established in 1958 under a deed that predates not only that amendment, but the county's current zoning framework entirely. The Right to Farm Act preempts this board's jurisdiction. Do you have anything else? Georgette said she did have something else. She said she had evidence that my farm stand was effectively a retail establishment and should be reclassified under the county's commercial zoning code. Floyd looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the other 4 board members. They all had the same expression, the look of people trying to decide whether to be annoyed or amused. When it was my turn, I kept it short. I presented the county's written compliance confirmation. I cited Virginia Code Section 3.2-300 through 3.2-302. I pointed out that my farm stand sold products grown exclusively on my property, which under Virginia's Agricultural and Forestal Districts Act is explicitly defined as a primary agricultural use, not a commercial use. Takeaway. Virginia's Right to Farm Act specifically protects on-farm direct sales of farm products as agricultural use, not commercial use, which means they cannot be regulated under commercial zoning codes. The board dismissed the hearing in 14 minutes. They didn't even vote. Floyd Mathers ruled it outside their jurisdiction as a matter of law and moved on to the next item on the agenda, which was a variance request for a backyard chicken coop in Millbrook Township. Georgette walked out of that hearing room with the particular rigid posture of a person who is publicly lost and is processing it as a strategic setback rather than a defeat. She stopped in the parking lot, turned to her attorney, and spoke for about 2 minutes in a low, taut voice. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. I'd seen that conversation before. On the drive home, Wendell called me from his Bluetooth. "She's not done," he said. "I know that look. She's going to try something different." Wendell, I said, letter. Because by then, I'd confirmed what I'd found in the land records. I'd verified it 3 ways: the original subdivision plat, the title chain at the county clerk, and a third-party title search I'd commissioned through a Charlottesville title company. I'd also had a quiet conversation with Marcus Delgado about the legal implications. Marcus had listened to my findings in complete silence for about 6 minutes. Then he said, "Reuben, do you understand what you're sitting on?" "I think so," I said. "You want to keep this in your pocket for now?" "Yes," I said, "until she goes one step too far." She did not disappoint. Georgette's new move involved the Harrow County Health Department. She filed a complaint alleging that my compost operation was creating a public health hazard, specifically that composting apple pomace and pear cores constituted food waste processing that required a commercial composting permit under state environmental regulations. This was actually a slightly more sophisticated legal argument than her previous ones, and I'll give her credit for that. On-farm composting of agricultural byproducts is exempt from commercial composting regulations in Virginia, but only if the compost is used exclusively on the farm where it's generated. If any of it is sold or given away, the exemption disappears. Now, I do occasionally give a bucket of finished compost to my neighbor Earl Hutchins, who has a kitchen garden. He's 78 years old. He brings me tomatoes in August. This is not commerce, it's neighborliness. But Georgette had somehow found out about it, and her complaint specifically cited the exchange with Earl. The health department inspector who showed up was a young woman named Daria Kowalczyk, efficient and unimpressed by Georgette's 8-page complaint packet. She spent an hour at my operation, examined my composting area, reviewed my records, and told me, "Give the compost to Earl in exchange for the tomatoes, and you have a barter transaction, which the exemption regulation doesn't address. My recommendation is to just stop the exchange while this complaint is open, and document that going forward." I stopped giving Earl compost. He was annoyed. I bought him a bag of organic compost from the hardware store. He was less annoyed. The health department closed the complaint as unsubstantiated 6 weeks later. But Georgette had used those 6 weeks. She'd also been in contact with 2 Sycamore Bluff residents who lived directly adjacent to my property, and had persuaded them to sign affidavits stating that my farm stand traffic, cars pulling into my gravel driveway on Saturday mornings, was disrupting their peaceful enjoyment of their property. Those affidavits landed in the hands of her Charlottesville attorney, who filed a motion in Harrow County Circuit Court for a preliminary injunction to halt farm stand operations pending a full nuisance hearing. I had been expecting this. Marcus Delgado had been expecting this. The response was ready within 48 hours, but now, with the filing in hand, I told Marcus it was time to open the envelope. Georgette Whitmore had made the foundational mistake that a certain kind of person always makes. She assumed that the rules only existed to constrain other people. Let me tell you exactly what I'd found. When Sycamore Bluff Estates was developed in 2015, the developer, a company called Blue Ridge Premier Properties, LLC, needed a parcel of land for the subdivision's common areas and clubhouse. The clubhouse sits on a 1.4-acre lot at the northeast corner of the development. That lot includes the HOA's parking lot, their swimming pool, their community garden, and the building where Georgette holds her monthly board meetings and waves her gavel around. Here is what was in the original subdivision plat, line 47 of the meets and bounds description for that 1.4-acre parcel. Subject to a permanent right-of-way and access easement held by the owner of the adjacent parcel, described in Deed Book 214, page 88, Harrow County Land Records. Deed Book 214, page 88, is my deed. My grandfather's deed, the original 1958 conveyance. Grandpa Chester, it turned out, had negotiated a permanent access easement across what eventually became the HOA's parking lot in 1958 as a condition of allowing a county road to be rerouted. The county road rerouting gave the county what it needed. Chester got a permanent, irrevocable easement allowing the owner of his parcel, which is now me, to cross the northeast portion of that 1.4-acre lot at any time for any agricultural purpose. The easement never expired. It wasn't subject to the HOA's CC and Rs because it predated them by 57 years. It was attached to the land itself, what lawyers call an easement appurtenant, meaning it transferred with title every time the land changed hands. It transferred to my father, it transferred to me. But that's not all. In 2014, when Blue Ridge Premier Properties was assembling the parcels it needed for Sycamore Bluff, it purchased that 1.4-acre lot from the estate of a man named Harold Ferris, who had owned a small machine shop on the property. The purchase price, per the deed stamp, was $312,000. What Blue Ridge Premier's title search had apparently missed, or, more troublingly, failed to disclose, was a lien recorded against that parcel in 2011. Harold Ferris had taken out a $47,000 business loan from a regional bank that had since been acquired and renamed. That loan had been paid down to $31,500 at the time of Harold's death. His estate had been in probate for 2 years, during which time nobody made payments. The bank had filed a lien on the property in 2012. The lien was still there. In 2015, when Blue Ridge Premier transferred title to the newly formed Sycamore Bluff HOA as part of the common area conveyance, the title was not clean. The $31,500 lien was still recorded against that parcel. The HOA had been holding title to their clubhouse property, their crown jewel, the building where Georgette ran her fiefdom, subject to a lien that nobody had ever cleared. Takeaway: a lien that isn't discharged at closing doesn't disappear. It runs with the land, meaning the new owner takes the property subject to the lien, regardless of whether they knew about it. This is not how real estate transactions are supposed to work. The title insurance company that handled the closing in 2015 had apparently issued a policy without catching the lien, which means the HOA had a potential title insurance claim worth $31,500, and the title company had some exposure. But more immediately relevant, a lien holder with a recorded lien against a property can, in certain circumstances, initiate foreclosure proceedings. The bank that held the lien had changed names twice through acquisitions. But liens don't die just because banks get absorbed. I spent 2 evenings tracking down who currently owned that debt obligation, and with the help of a commercial lender contact of Marcus Delgado's, we identified the successor institution, a community bank in Harrisonburg. Marcus contacted the bank. The lien was still on their books. It had been sitting there, forgotten, for 11 years, accruing interest. The total obligation, with interest, was $44,200. I bought it for $32,000. Yes, I purchased the lien on the HOA's clubhouse property. Not the property itself, just the legal right to enforce the debt obligation. Under Virginia law, a lien purchaser steps into the shoes of the original lien holder, which meant I now held a $44,200 lien against the 1.4-acre parcel that housed Sycamore Bluff HOA's clubhouse, pool, and parking lot. I was not planning to foreclose on the HOA's clubhouse. I am not a monster. But I was planning to disclose this at precisely the right moment. Meanwhile, the court battle was pending. Marcus had filed our response to the injunction motion, which was a masterwork of controlled aggression. He cited the Right to Farm Act, the county's compliance letter, the Board of Zoning Appeals ruling, and then added a counterclaim for abuse of process, arguing that Georgette's pattern of filing bad faith complaints constituted a deliberate campaign to interfere with my lawful agricultural operation. And then, for good measure, Marcus noted, in a single, almost casual paragraph at the end of the counterclaim, that our client had recently acquired a recorded lien interest in certain real property owned by the Sycamore Bluff HOA, and reserved all rights with respect to that interest. The settlement conference was held in Marcus Delgado's office in Staunton, second floor of a Victorian on Beverly Street, that always smells like wood polish and old paper, with a view of the Shenandoah Valley Mountains on clear days. Georgette's attorney, his name was Preston Yarborough, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had the look of someone who'd been handed a case he didn't entirely believe in, came alone. Georgette had wanted to come. Marcus had specified in writing that the conference was attorney only. She'd pushed back. Marcus had been firm. She'd called me personally to argue about it, which told me she was rattled. I sat in the adjacent conference room with the door cracked. Marcus handled the conversation. The meeting lasted 45 minutes. Yarborough opened by offering to drop the injunction motion in exchange for my agreement to limit farm stand operating hours and install a privacy fence along the common property line. Marcus declined. Yarborough offered to drop the injunction and the nuisance claim entirely if I agreed not to pursue the abuse of process counterclaim. Marcus said we'd need something more. Yarborough asked what we had in mind. Marcus laid it out. First, all legal proceedings against my orchard, including any future complaints or filings arising from the same set of facts, terminated with prejudice. Second, a formal written acknowledgement from the HOA that my operation is compliant and that they have no authority over my property. Third, the lien on the clubhouse parcel. Yarborough went quiet. Then, "You're going to foreclose on a community swimming pool over a farm stand dispute?" Marcus said, "We have no present intention of foreclosing. We have every present intention of retaining that lien interest indefinitely, unless and until we reach a comprehensive resolution. A lien on the HOA's common area property affects their ability to refinance, affects their property insurance, and, if we choose, could complicate their annual budget approval process, since a responsible HOA board would be obligated to disclose a recorded lien to its members." There was a long pause. From my position in the adjacent room, I could hear Yarborough shifting in his chair. "What does resolving the lien look like?" he asked. Marcus said the lien would be discharged in full, meaning the HOA would need to pay the $44,200 principal plus interest, or we would negotiate a structured resolution that also addressed my attorney's fees in defending against 2 years of bad faith actions. Yarborough said he needed to consult his client. The meeting ended. And that's when the story took its final turn, because Yarborough apparently called Georgette and explained, in detail, what a recorded lien against common area property meant for the HOA, including the part where, as HOA president, she had a fiduciary duty to disclose material encumbrances on HOA property to the full membership. She hadn't, which means that within 48 hours of the settlement conference, 18 Sycamore Bluff homeowners knew that their HOA president had spent 2 years in a legal war against their orchard neighbor, had racked up significant legal fees, and had somehow failed to notice that their clubhouse sat subject to a lien that a retired land surveyor down the road had just purchased. The calls and emails I received in those 48 hours were, I'll be honest, extremely satisfying to read. Here's the thing about leverage. It only works if you're willing to use it, but wise if you deploy it without cruelty. I didn't want Georgette financially destroyed. I didn't want 47 families in Sycamore Bluff unable to use their pool because of a title defect. That was never the goal. The goal was to make the aggression stop, permanently, and to do it in a way that left the community intact and me free to run my orchard in peace. So Marcus and I spent a week building a comprehensive resolution framework. And when I say building, I mean we sat at his conference table with maps, title documents, the lien paperwork, the Virginia Code open on a laptop, and about $11 worth of cold brew coffee, working through every contingency like engineers stress testing a bridge. The framework had 4 parts. Part 1 was the lien resolution. The HOA's own title insurance policy, the one issued in 2015, almost certainly covered the undisclosed lien. Marcus contacted the title insurance company directly and gave them a detailed memo explaining the defect. The title company's counsel confirmed coverage. That meant the title insurer, not the HOA's homeowners, would pay the $44,200 to discharge the lien. I would receive the full amount I'd paid for the lien plus the accrued interest, netting me a legitimate profit on what had started as a defensive maneuver. The title company would then subrogate, meaning they'd pursue recovery from whoever had messed up the original title search in 2015. Takeaway: if you're buying property with title insurance and a lien is later discovered that the insurer missed, that's exactly what title insurance is for. File a claim, and the insurer covers the defect, then goes after whoever caused it. Part 2 was the legal fee reimbursement. The HOA had burned through significant legal fees pursuing what any competent real property attorney would have told them was a losing position. That was their problem. My problem was that I'd spent $14,600 in attorney's fees defending against their campaign. Marcus drafted a settlement term requiring the HOA to reimburse my legal fees in full, funded by a draw from their reserve account. Part 3 was the recorded covenant. We drafted a covenant to be recorded in the Harrow County land records, running with the land on both sides, formally establishing that the Sycamore Bluff HOA had no authority or interest in my parcel, that my agricultural operation was compliant and non-objectionable, and that future HOA boards were bound by this acknowledgement. Recording it in the land records meant it wasn't just a contract between me and the current HOA, it was permanent. Future HOA presidents, including whoever came after Georgette, Couldn't restart this fight without breaching a recorded covenant. Part 4 was the one I was proudest of. During the 2-year ordeal, I'd had dozens of conversations with Sycamore Bluff homeowners who were furious with Georgette, not just because of what she'd done to me, but because of the HOA dues she'd spent on attorney's fees pursuing a vendetta instead of maintaining their community. Several of them had reached out asking if there was anything they could do. I told them to wait. Now was the time. Wendell Oakes, who as a retired attorney understood HOA governance law better than most, had been coordinating with 11 other homeowners on a formal petition to call a special meeting of the HOA membership. Under Virginia's Property Owners Association Act, specifically Virginia Code Section 55.1-1815, homeowners can petition for a special meeting with 20% of the membership's signatures. They had 40%. Takeaway: Virginia law gives HOA homeowners the right to call a special membership meeting by petition and to vote on matters including the removal of board members, which is a power many HOA residents don't know they have. The special meeting was scheduled for a Saturday morning in late October. The agenda had 3 items. First, a presentation on the HOA's legal expenses over the prior 2 years. Second, a vote on the proposed settlement with me. And third, a vote on whether to seek the resignation of the current HOA president. Georgette tried to have the meeting canceled. The property management company that administered the HOA's records told her it couldn't be canceled. State law required it to proceed. She tried to have Wendell removed from the Homeowners Association email list. The management company told her that would violate the VPOA Act. She tried to get me barred from attending as a guest. Wendell pointed out that I had a recorded easement right across their parking lot, and that my attendance as Wendell's personal guest was not something the HOA board had authority to prohibit. She went quiet after that, the quiet before the storm. I spent the week before the meeting doing what I always do in October: harvesting. The Honeycrisp trees come in last, and they are worth the wait. That Tuesday morning, picking apples in the cold blue air of an Appalachian autumn, the fog still sitting in the valley below, the smell of ripe fruit almost sugary in the chill, I felt for the first time in 2 years like everything was going to be fine. Georgette didn't give up without one final offensive. That's the thing about people who operate through institutional power. When the institution turns on them, they get personal. The week before the special meeting, 2 things happened that I wasn't expecting. First, a post appeared on the Harrow County Community Facebook group, the one with about 9,000 members, mostly locals who use it for lost dogs, yard sales, and heated debates about road paving priorities. The post was anonymous. It claimed that my farm stand had sold potentially contaminated apple cider that had caused illness in multiple families. No names, no details, just the accusation, written with just enough specificity to sound credible. The post got 47 comments in 2 hours before the group administrators removed it as an unverified health claim. But 47 comments is enough to plant a seed of doubt, and I had farm stand customers texting me within the hour asking if there was a problem. I handled it the same way I handle everything, directly. I posted my own statement, under my full name, with my Virginia Department of Agriculture food handler certification, my cider press inspection records, and a photo of my current food safety certificate. I offered full refunds to any customer who'd had a concern. 0 refund requests came in, because there was nothing wrong with my cider. I did some digging on the anonymous post. Facebook's group tools don't reveal identities to admins unless law enforcement is involved. But the post's writing style, particularly the phrase "quality of life" and the construction of its sentences, matched closely with the language in Georgette's complaint filings. I showed this to Marcus. He raised an eyebrow. We documented it carefully. Second, Georgette contacted the Harrow County Planning Commission directly and requested an emergency agenda item for their November meeting, alleging that my property had been subdivided without proper plat approval based on a tip she'd received. She claimed I had sold a portion of my 17 acres to a business entity without recording a subdivision plat, which would be a code violation. I had not subdivided my property. I had not sold any portion of it. What I had done 2 years earlier was create a single-member LLC to hold my farm stand's business operations, a completely standard liability protection measure that any business attorney would recommend. The LLC owned the business. I owned the land. These are legally distinct, which is the whole point of an LLC. But here's the thing. Georgette apparently didn't understand the difference between a business entity owning a business and a business entity owning real property. She'd somehow convinced herself, or, more likely, convinced her attorney, who either agreed with her or didn't push back hard enough, that my business LLC constituted a conveyance of land. The Planning Commission's staff attorney reviewed her request and declined to place it on the emergency agenda. She placed it on the regular agenda for January. That meant it wasn't going to be heard until after the special meeting. But the request was public record, and Georgette made sure every Sycamore Bluff homeowner knew about it, framing it as evidence that I was the one engaged in shady land dealings. I found out about this on a Wednesday afternoon, while I was repairing a section of post and rail fence along my south pasture, the kind of work that requires just enough physical attention to quiet the mind. The smell of split oak posts is something I associate with my father. He always said woodwork kept a man honest. I finished the fence section, drove the last post cap in with a rubber mallet, and called Marcus. "She's trying to muddy the water before the special meeting," Marcus said. "Yes," I said. "Let her." What Georgette hadn't accounted for, what people who fight dirty never seem to account for, is that dirty fighting leaves marks. Every move she made was documented. The anonymous Facebook post had been screenshotted before removal. The emergency planning request was on the public record. The timing of both, 8 days before the special meeting, was obvious to anyone paying attention. I didn't respond publicly. I prepared. I compiled a summary document, a clean 6-page PDF with a timeline of every complaint, every filing, every administrative action Georgette had initiated against me over 24 months. Next to each entry, the date, the agency, the outcome, and the associated cost, both to me and, where estimable, to the HOA and legal fees. The total legal fees billed to the HOA by Georgette's attorney, per invoices disclosed during the settlement conference process, $38,400. The total amount of annual HOA dues paid by each Sycamore Bluff homeowner, $1,800 per year. The HOA had 47 homes. $38,400 divided by 47 homeowners is roughly $817 per household. That's nearly half a year's dues spent on a legal campaign against a neighbor's orchard that had zero legal basis and zero chance of success. I printed that PDF on nice paper. I had 48 copies made at the office supply store in Waynesboro. I didn't distribute them yet. I brought them to the meeting in a manila envelope under my arm. The special meeting was set for 10 o'clock Saturday morning. By 9:30, the Sycamore Bluff Clubhouse parking lot was full. Cars lined the street for a quarter mile in each direction. In 12 years of HOA existence, they'd never had a meeting attendance like this. I arrived at 9:45 with Wendell Oakes and Marcus Delgado. Wendell signed us in as his guests. Georgette was already inside, standing near the front of the room in a charcoal blazer, talking to two of her board allies with the tight, over-controlled body language of a person running on adrenaline and spite. The clubhouse's main room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and the ghost of 1,000 potluck dinners. Folding chairs had been set up in rows. Every chair was filled. People were standing along the back wall. Patricia Holtz from the Harrow County Ledger was there, notebook in hand, sitting in the second row. She'd called me the day before, asking if the meeting was open to press. Under Virginia's VPOA Act, HOA meetings are generally open to members, but guests can be excluded by board vote. Georgette had, in fact, attempted to exclude press. The HOA's property management company had advised her that excluding credentialed press from a meeting where financial misconduct allegations were to be presented could expose the HOA to additional liability. She'd backed down. The meeting was called to order by the HOA's parliamentarian, a retired school teacher named Dolores Mack, who had the gravitas of a federal judge and absolutely no patience for procedural games. Dolores had run HOA meetings for 8 years and was, by all accounts, scrupulously fair. Georgette had tried to replace her as parliamentarian before the meeting. The board had voted 3-2 against it. Agenda Item 1, Legal Expenditures. A Sycamore Bluff homeowner named Brent Gallo, an accountant, as it happened, presented a spreadsheet. He'd compiled the invoices from the HOA's attorney, cross-referenced them with the HOA's reserve fund account statements, and produced a clear picture. $38,400 in legal fees over 24 months, drawn from the operating reserve. The reserve fund, which was supposed to cover capital maintenance needs like the pool pump, the parking lot resurfacing, and the clubhouse roof, had been depleted by 31%. Georgette stood up and said the legal expenditures were justified because the orchard represented a genuine threat to community property values and quality of life. 3 things happened at once. Brent said, every single legal action failed. Every complaint was dismissed. How does that represent value for our dues? A woman in the back row said audibly, my roof assessment just went up because of this. And someone's phone displayed the Ledger's website. Patricia had already published a short breaking news item. Headline visible on the screen held up for the row behind them to see. HO, a president's 2-year legal campaign against neighboring orchard cost members $38,400. Agenda item 2 was the proposed settlement. Marcus walked the room through it in plain English. No legalese. The title insurance company covers the lien. Homeowners pay nothing. My attorney fees are reimbursed from the reserve. The recorded covenant closes the loop permanently. He had printed copies of the settlement terms for anyone who wanted to read the actual language. The vote was 41 in favor, 6 opposed. The 6 opposed were Georgette, her 2 board allies, and 3 homeowners who'd signed the original affidavits. Agenda item 3. Wendell Oaks presented the motion to request Georgette's resignation as HOA president. He was measured, fair, and precise. He did not call her names. He did not make it personal. He said, the president has demonstrated a pattern of using HOA resources funded by our dues, for purposes that had no legal basis and that resulted in significant financial harm to this community. A president in that position has a responsibility to the community, and that responsibility has not been honored. Georgette asked for the floor. Dolores Mack gave it to her. She stood up and gave a 4-minute speech about community standards, property values, and the need for vigilance against incompatible land uses. She cited her years of service. She cited the consulting firm's report. She said she had acted in good faith and would do it again. When she sat down, the room was quiet for about 5 seconds. Then a homeowner in the 4th row, a retired firefighter named Dale Bunce, who I recognized from his brief wave at my farm stand the previous August, raised his hand and said, with respect, ma'am, you spent my money attacking a man's apple trees. I think that's all we need to know. The vote to request Georgette's resignation. 38 in favor, 9 opposed. The vote was non-binding. She could technically have remained in office. But she knew, and everyone in that room knew, that she was finished. After the vote was announced and the room absorbed it, Georgette sat very still for a moment. The clubhouse had gone from heated energy to a kind of suspended quiet, the kind that follows a gavel strike in a courtroom. Patricia Holt was writing fast. 2 homeowners near the back were already on their phones. Then I stood up. Dolores Mack looked at me. I said, I'd like to address the membership, if that's permissible. She checked with the parliamentarian's rule book, a physical binder she'd carried under her arm all morning, and confirmed that as a guest of a member, I could speak during the open comment period. I walked to the front of the room. The walk was about 30 feet. It felt much shorter. I set the manila envelope on the podium and looked out at 47 households worth of people, most of whom I'd never formally met, a few of whom I recognized from the farm stand, all of whom were looking at me with the focused attention you give someone when you're genuinely uncertain what they're going to say. I said, I want to start by saying that I don't have any hard feelings toward this community. Sycamore Bluff was built on land adjacent to mine, and most of you had nothing to do with what happened over the last 2 years. You were dues-paying members of an organization whose leadership made some decisions without your knowledge or consent. That's not your fault. I heard a few people exhale. I said, I also want to be clear about something. I'm not here to take anyone's clubhouse. I'm not here to foreclose on anyone's pool. I never was. The lien I purchased was a legal tool, a response to a situation where I felt I had no other options. Now that we have a resolution, that lien is going to be discharged cleanly by the title insurance company, and this community will have clear title to this property. I recommend you confirm that in writing with your property management company within 30 days. Then I took the PDF copies out of the manila envelope and asked 2 of Wendell's allies to pass them down the rows. 6 pages, clean layout, timeline of every complaint, every filing, every dismissal, every legal fee. This is for your records, I said, not as a weapon, as documentation, because the next time someone seeks to lead this HOA, and the time after that, you deserve to know what this kind of leadership costs. I looked at Georgette when I said that. She was looking at the table in front of her. I said one more thing, and this was the part I'd thought about the most. My grandfather planted his first apple tree on this land in 1958. He believed that growing food was a form of dignity, that a person who grows something is making an argument for their place in the world. I inherited that belief. I hope this community will let it stand. I walked back to my seat. The room was quiet for another 2 seconds. Then Dale Bunce started clapping, and the rest of the room followed, and it was loud enough that I could feel it in my chest. Patricia Holt's full story ran in the Ledger the following Wednesday. The headline was, "Orchard owner discovers HOA's clubhouse has a lien problem, and how he used it to end a 2-year dispute." It ran above the fold. It was also picked up by the Charlottesville Daily Progress and shared around 6,000 times on social media over the following week. Georgette Whitmore submitted her resignation as HOA president 11 days after the special meeting. Her letter, per the property management company's disclosure to members, cited personal circumstances and a desire to allow new leadership to take the community in a fresh direction. Her attorney, Preston Yarborough, sent Marcus a final letter confirming the settlement agreement was fully executed. His tone, Marcus told me, was that of a man who was genuinely glad to be done with the case. The title insurance payout cleared in 6 weeks. I received $47,800. My $32,000 purchase price, plus the accrued interest and a small additional payment under the settlement terms covering my legal fees. I want to be clear about the money, because I know what you're thinking. I didn't do this for the money. But I'm not going to pretend that recovering $14,600 in legal fees and making a legitimate return on a defensive investment felt bad. It felt exactly as good as it should. The mic drop moment, if you want to call it that, wasn't the vote. It wasn't even the speech. It was later that afternoon, after the meeting, when I was walking back to my truck through the Sycamore Bluff parking lot, the 1.4-acre parcel that my grandfather's 1958 easement crosses, and I realized I'd been walking across this ground my whole life. My grandfather walked it before I was born. And no HOA resolution, no matter how many PowerPoints it had, was ever going to change that. That's the thing about land. It has a longer memory than any of us. It's been 8 months now, and the orchard has never looked better. The new HOA president is a soft-spoken civil engineer named Bernard Cho, who ran on a platform of fiduciary responsibility and minding our own business. He won 42-5. His first act as president was to hire a proper HOA attorney to conduct a full title review of all common area parcels, something that, remarkably, had never been done. 2 additional minor title defects were found and corrected through the title insurance policy. No drama, just competent administration. Wendell Oakes joined the HOA board as treasurer. He has been an exceptional treasurer. He sends me updates occasionally. The reserve fund is recovering. My farm stand, the eyesore, the nuisance, the source of all that community disruption, has had its best year on record. I added a Saturday morning pick-your-own program in September that drew families from as far as Charlottesville and Staunton. Cars lined up on the county road. The cider press ran from 7 in the morning until we ran out of apples. The smell of fresh-pressed cider on a cold mountain morning is one of the best smells in the world, and I'm going to put that on the record. Earl Hutchins got his compost back. He brought me 6 pounds of heirloom tomatoes in August. We're even. The financial settlement gave me the ability to do something I'd been thinking about for a long time. I worked with the Harrow County Community Foundation to establish the Chester Calloway Agricultural Scholarship, a $1,500 annual scholarship for a Harrow County high school senior pursuing studies in agriculture, horticulture, environmental science, or land management. The first recipient was a 17-year-old named Jade Okafor from the Western District, who wants to study sustainable agriculture at Virginia Tech. I met her at the county fair in October. She had strong handshake and 3 questions about orchard drainage systems. She's going to be extraordinary. Additionally, I donated a 1/4-acre strip along my north fence line, with a conservation easement, to the Harrow Land Trust, permanently protecting that corridor from development and providing a native habitat buffer for the watershed. The easement was recorded in December. It's now permanent, just like my grandfather's access easement, just like the rights I fought to keep. I also started hosting what I'm calling the Callaway Orchard Heritage Festival. 1 weekend each October, free admission, with demonstrations of traditional apple pressing, grafting, and orchard management. Last year we had 200 people show up. A dozen Sycamore Bluff homeowners came. Dale Bunce brought his grandkids. Bernard Cho stayed for 3 hours and helped sort apples. Georgette Whitmore listed her Sycamore Bluff home in January. I don't know where she moved. I wish her no specific ill. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Beyond the satisfaction of watching petty authority face consequences. And yes, that satisfaction is valid. Enjoy it. Know what you own. Read your deed. Read the title history. If you own property, request a copy of the recorded plat from your county clerk's office. For most people, it's a $5 fee and takes about 20 minutes. You may find rights you didn't know you had. You may find encumbrances on neighboring properties that affect you. Land records are public. They're free or nearly free to access. A retired land surveyor can tell you that the information you need to protect yourself is almost certainly already in the public record. You just have to look. Know your state's Right to Farm Act. If you're in agriculture, even small-scale agriculture, your state almost certainly has one. In Virginia, it's Title 3.2 of the Code. Other states have equivalent protections. Print it. Keep it. Know what it says. Know your HOA rights. If you're a homeowner in an HOA, look up your state's Property Owners Association Act, or equivalent. You have rights to meeting minutes, financial records, and the ability to call a special meeting by petition. Most HOA members don't know this. Georgette was counting on that ignorance. Don't give anyone that advantage. Grandpa Chester planted apple trees because he believed a man who grows food can't be broken. I believe he was right. And I believe the same thing about knowledge. The kind of knowledge that's sitting in a county clerk's office right now, available to anyone willing to drive over and ask for it. Don't let anyone tell you the ground you're standing on isn't worth fighting for.